Professor SUMIOKA's University Standard Philosophy course. Hi everyone! So, what do we do today? Anything? I'm surprised no more.
Today's theme is Buddhism.
Aha, I couldn't figure out just that. However, isn't it a religion to worship Buddha?
Indeed, temples these days may be so, but initially, Buddha meant instead, awakened against religion.
Wow, then, how did it leave religion, and why has it fallen again into religion?
You may have heard of the Indus Valley Civilization. Since around 2600 BC, many cities were built there, but they had no palaces or temples, so it is guessed that there was an equal and peaceful society. However, this civilization suddenly disappeared around the 17th century BC, and the Aryans migrated south from Central Asia.
It was also around this time that the northern people conquered Greece and the Chinese unified dynasty was established. Did some major climate change happen?
Chased away by the Aryans, they moved to the east, the Ganges Valley. But it was a terrible place. Being inland at the foot of the Himalayas, summers are extremely hot and rainy, causing flooding by the melting snow, while winters are bitterly cold and dry, and even wheat dies. Moreover, the area was full of swamps, with many pests and vermin, and epidemics were always prevalent.
Wow, compared to the previous Indus, it's hell.
Society was also awful. Armed Aryans called Kshatriyas, about 20%, built small states in pieces, and fought with each other. Other Aryans, Vaishyas, about 25%, became farm owners and merchants. On the other hand, the conquered Indians and the defeated Aryans of 50%, were forced into farming and other labor, as slaves, Shudras. Only 5% engaged in worship and education as Brahmins, were free but poor.
That is the notorious status system, caste.
They relied on various gods with Brahmins. Since 1000 BC, Brahmins unified and summarized their religion, as the Vedas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. Veda means knowledge, and has hymns of various gods to rely on. Brahmanas are explanations of worship rituals for each god. Aranyakas are spells to summon the gods. But Upanishads made since the 7th century BC, showed a brand new mysterious dogma. Initially, it would be just a genealogy of their gods. However, the genealogy eventually brought Brahmanism to monotheism. It said, the ultimate god, Brahman, the heavenly soul of the universe, had become everything. Even the souls of humans and animals, are fragments of it, Atmans. To know this mystery, Brahmins developed the secret method of yoga, meditation with unique breathing, and expressed the secret as, Tat-Tvam Ashi, namely, you are the it.
With joking or hyperventilating, anyone may hallucinate.
However, Brahmins regarded it as proof that, only they connected with the Brahman, and they taught that, people other than them, had to be reborn in some other bodies again after death, as reincarnation, samsara. Of course, no one wished to be reborn as a miserable Shudra, much less a dog and a worm, so they asked Brahman for salvation.
That is just a misconvenient for the Brahmins.
A Kshatriya in the first half of the 6th century, Vardhamana, also known as Mahavira, noticed that, as long as all of us are the fragments of the same Brahman, there is no difference between Brahmins and them. Thus, he established Jainism, to win the faith. They thought, they had to purify their souls, to free themselves from samsara, and return to the Brahman. So they abandoned families and all possessions, even their clothes, left their homes, and trained all in the buff with the ascetic company in the wilderness. They also practiced yoga, furthermore, to cut relations with the earthly world, they never killed living things.
They were similar to the Pythagoreans.
However, a Jainist in the middle of the 6th century BC, Gosala, criticized Jainism, for retaining the desire for liberation, and became independent as Adzivikism. According to him, the world is inorganic without a heart, so everything happens only following the causality. Therefore, what we should do is, not only cut earthly relations, but also eliminate any hopes. But no matter how much they practiced, they could only get a momentary glimpse of Brahman, so they turned to more extreme penances, like sleeping on needles or hanging upside down.
I hear when pushed to extremes, humans conversely feel ecstasy, but those have nothing to do with the Brahman. Siddhartha was also one of such ascetics, wasn't he? But I hear he was previously a privileged Kshatriya prince.
He was not so happy. His castle belonged to the Kosala kingdom, and the rival Magadha kingdom might ruin it any time. He was so scared that he abandoned his wife and child, and threw himself into practice, around 536 BC. But after penance for 6 years in vain, just before his dying, blessed with porridge by a girl, he realized that he was upside down. Worrying about what will happen after death, he had lost sight of his real life.
If he had not found that, he would only repeat the same penance, even when he was reborn.
After that, he meditated calmly under the linden tree. At last, he found the origin of the problem, his ignorance, a idiot. According to him, we are swayed by the Brahmin's myth, because we do not know what happens after death. The anxiety makes us waste our real lives, and suffer deeper. Therefore, we should rather shut out the origin of the problem, our ignorance.
Our ignorance is a negative arche, but what should we know?
He advocated two truths, Sabba Dhammaranattar, and Sabba Sankhara Anicca, namely, everything has no essence, and everything goes with no identity. All that we see are just temporal phenomena caused by accidental conditions, prartica samutpada. Nevertheless, we regard them as real existences, and lament their loss. Therefore, he brought up the third truth, everything becomes suffering, sabba sankhara dukkha, by our adherence, abhinivesa. So, he taught forth that, just understanding the world's truths, and fading our adherence, liberates and brings us to peace, nirvana.
What did Siddhartha think about samsara?
You see a white circle here, don't you? Nevertheless, there is no circle, but some black parts are standing in a certain way. What we regard as real, is all similar, just by accidental conditions, prartica samutpada, so in fact, nothing exists. Atman is also not an existence, but just a phenomenon, a temporal aggregate of sensations. After death, nothing remains. Therefore, what could be reborn? Since then, many people, especially practitioners stuck in other orders, came to beg Siddhartha for guidance, and his disciples gradually increased. However, he denied Brahmanism, and regarded the penances of Jainism and Advaita as meaningless. Therefore, losing many believers, those orders attacked him and his disciples, both in argument and with violence.
He said religion was the illusion of ignorance, so there was a natural result.
As long as Siddhartha was alive, his disciples kept their union. But they were confused after his death at 80, about 486 BC. Disliking rigid rules, he had left everything to the local councils from before. In addition, his teachings were inconsistent, because he guided them, depending on their personalities and the occasion. Disciples gathered together, as the first Buddhist council, and tried to compile Siddhartha's lectures as Agama, although many local councils did not accept this.
Since he lived a long life, he should be able to write down the scriptures himself, or did he consider even truths to dissolve?
After that, although without a unified doctrine, Siddhartha's teachings spread further. However, 100 years after his death, in the first half of the 4th century BC, they were divided into the Theravada party and the Mahasamgika party, at the Second Buddhist Council. The former regarded propagation as their discipline, while the latter preached as their profession.
In short, there was a problem of money.
Alexander the Great invaded even the Indus, at the end of the 4th century BC. After he had gone, Chandragupta of Ganges conquered the Indus, and founded the Maurya dynasty. At the height of the dynasty, the third king Ashoka, ruled from Afghanistan in the west, to the Deccan Plateau in the south. He was devout, and protected religions.
Maurya was the first unified dynasty of India.
The Theravada party held the Third Buddhist Council, under King Ashoka, around 250 BC, and confirmed the sutras, the rules, and the commentaries. Thus, they were transformed into Buddhism, namely, worship for Ratnatraya, Buddhas, Dharma, and the priests. They taught people that these have supernatural powers, and built stupas containing Siddhartha's bones, in various places. Their Buddhism spread widely, even as far as the western Hellenistic country in Central Asia, the Greco-Bactrian kingdom.
Believing in souls, they had previously dumped the bodies in the river without hesitation. In addition, Siddhartha had denied even the soul. Buddhism of worship for bones and priests was obviously different from Siddhartha's teachings.
Yeah, it was just a plot of Buddhist monks, taking over the position of the Brahmins. After King Ashoka's death, his many princes and generals fought with each other, and the empire fell into turmoil. General Pushyamitra defeated the Maurya, and established the Shunga Empire. He was from the Brahmin caste, persecuted Buddhists, whether the Theravada party or the Mahasamgika party, and destroyed stupas. Therefore, only Theravada Buddhism remained, in distant Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and South India.
So, were Brahmins worshipped again?
People now wished for benefits in this life, rather than liberation from reincarnation. Therefore, Brahmanism personified Brahman, as the creator god Brahma, an old man with 4 heads. Corresponding to the Buddhists' worship of Dharma, it gave the universal god Vishnu with 4 hands, the role of keeping the world. It also took in the oldest god, Shiva of the conquered Indus, who governs innovations. Furthermore, to respond to people's wishes, it lined up various gods, such as Ganesha of wealth, Kama of love, Hanuman of fight, etc., and regained its popularity as Hinduism.
Eventually, it reverted to polytheism.
Even after Alexander, the Greeks ruled Central Asia, as the Seleucid Empire, and the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom. When the Indian Maurya dynasty weakened around 200 BC, it expanded over the Hindu Kush, and was influenced by Buddhism. After that, when the Shunga Empire of Brahmanism overtook India, many Buddhists sought refuge in Greco-Bactria, due to the persecution. However, at the same time, Greco-Bactria was divided by royal disputes between Bactria and India, which fought against each other.
Anyways, they were no longer the followers of Siddhartha's teachings, but of a new Mauryan cult Buddhism, to worship priests like Brahmanism.
King Menander I of the Indo-Greek kingdom discussed with priest Nargasena at his palace of Gandhara, and converted to Buddhism. Following him, over 30,000 Greeks became Buddhist monks, and spread Buddhism. Influenced by Greek art, many Buddhist statues were also created.
It was so-called Gandhara art. With it, Buddhism got the concrete but symbolic form.
To understand Siddhartha's teachings, they developed a profound Buddhist philosophy, like the Greek one. They compiled it, in a dialogue, Milinda Panha. According to it, priest Nargasena answered Menander that, everything is just a mishmash of parts, and the same goes for all parts, so nothing has its essence. As well, even if something seems to keep its identity, it is in fact quite a different thing, just in the same place, like a lamplight. However, as long as one causes the consequences, one has the responsibility.
That easily explains Siddhartha's teachings on no essence, no identity, and causality. They would have already known the contradictory arguments of the Eleatic school in Greek philosophy.
Buddhist philosophy had a room for various interpretations, splitting it into many Buddhist sects, even within the Theravada party, and later called Nikaya Buddhism. The most prevalent was the Sarvastivada sect. They thought that only Dharma is eternal, even if we could only recognize its fleeting appearance. But other sects opposed them, and they fiercely argued with each other.
Siddhartha might have thought, even causality and responsibility dissolve.
The Parthian Empire rose in Persia, while the Xiongnu in the north of China also expanded its power, and forced Central Asian nomads to migrate to the south. The nomads defeated the Greco-Bactria, and established the Kushan Empire instead. After that, they conquered even the Indo-Greek kingdom, and fought against Parthia. Thus, the empire absorbed Hellenism, Parsianism, and Buddhism.
The Xiongnu would eventually expand west, driving the Germanics into the Roman Empire in the 4th century.
King Kanishka was at the height of the Kushan Empire. He ruled from the northern half of India to western China. Although not a Buddhist, he protected Buddhism, especially the Sarvastivada sect. However, some monks rebelled against the privileged aristocracy of priests. They composed a spectacular universe saga of the fantastic Buddhas, the Lotus Sutra, in the 2nd century. The basic teaching is that every life has Buddhidharma, the enlightenment nature, so Buddhism saves everyone. It was called Mahayana Buddhism.
Previously, Theravada Buddhism was just the worship of Buddhist priests, but Mahayana Buddhism recognized the dignity of all people and all living beings.
The saga began at the Vulture Peak in East India. When Siddhartha got into samadhi or unified with Dharma, in front of the audience of tens of thousands, the ray he emitted from his forehead illuminated the whole world. First in chapters 2 to 9, with some parables, Siddhartha announced that he would make everyone become a Buddha, with all measures. Next in chapters 10 to 22, he explained the significance and practice of monks, by showing his past and their future. And third, 23 to 28, this sutra is praised by the stories of some divine monks, like Guanyin of Message and Samantabhadra of Wisdom.
It is bizarre that the sutra praises the sutra within the sutra.
In ancient Mesopotamia, winter was the rainy season with floods, and spring was the farming season. Around 2000 BC, the vernal equinox, the intersection of the celestial equator and the solar ecliptic, was in the constellation Taurus. People believed that the divine hero Mitra slaughters the old bull to usher in the new year. Zoroastrianism of Persia disliked Mitraism, but it remained in Central Asia. In addition, Alexander the Great came to India in the spring of 326 BC and promised the stationed Greeks to return someday, which made him the savior Mitra. Mahayana Buddhism absorbed the myth and regarded Mitra as the divine monk Maitreya, the next monk to attain enlightenment after the late Siddhartha, and to save people.
I hear Maitreya means promise.
However, the promise was too old to believe. So people established a new deity called Amitabha, meaning eternal life. It is an already enlightened Buddha, accompanied by the divine monk brothers of princes, Guanyin of Message and Mahastharmapraptar of Ability. He had created the Pure Land in the West, meets us at our death, takes us there, and teaches us to make us Buddhas. Pure Landism became popular as Mahayana Buddhism.
They believed the Pure Land had already been completed in the West, but where is the West, India or Rome?
Against the Sarvastivada sect, which insisted that at least Dharma exists, physician Nagarjuna retorted logically, with proof by contradiction. If existence and absence could be separated, then there would also be the absence of existence and the existence of absence. Therefore he thought that everything that exists is, in fact, sunya, and that it can become everything by accidental conditions, prarticha samitpada. So he advocated the wisdom of moderation, not to consider decisively. The followers were called the Madhyamaka school.
From the beginning, the Sarvastivada school differed from Siddhartha's teachings.
At the same time, when the Germanics invaded the Roman Empire, the Sasanian Persia ruined the Kushan Empire in 375. After that, the Aryans dominated northern India again, as the Gupta Empire, and revived original Indian culture, especially the polytheistic Hinduism. In response, Buddhism also became polytheistic, by personifying each efficacy of Dharma. Here, it first took back the Hindu god of Dharma, Vishnu, as Vairochana, an awakened Buddha who illuminates everything like the sun, and settled it as the chief deity.
Initially, Hinduism had taken the Dharma of Buddhism in the god Vishnu.
Like Brahmanism, the monks of Eso Buddhism aimed to embody Dharma, by unifying themselves with Vairochana and other Buddhas. They introduced the mandala sketch of the Dharma world, from Brahmanism, for their meditation method. It is composed of Vairochana on the top of Mount Meru at its center, with the Nimba circle of the four Buddhas of wisdom, the eastern Akshobhya of stability, the southern Ratnasambhava of equality, the western Amitabha of salvation, and the northern Amoghasiddhi of practice.
The occultic Eso Buddhism seems to be a return to Brahmanism.
Many Buddhist texts had already been transmitted, around the distant Taklamakan desert, western China. Influenced by the Sarvastivada school, they turned the infinite analyzing argument in Milinda Panha to positive, and invented a unique Mahayana Buddhist philosophy, centered around Vairochana, and compiled the Avatamsaka Sutra. It said that every whole and every piece of the world fractally contains Dharma.
The worldview was like a kaleidoscope.
Although the Gupta Empire was based on popular Hinduism, in 427, it built the Nalanda Academy, 10 kilometers north of the Vulture Peak in East India, with 1,500 lecturers and more than 10,000 monks, to study not only Hinduism and Brahmanism, but also Buddhism and other various religions, with logics, astronomy, literature, even law. It also had a system to accept international students from China and Tibet.
It was was Odun bigger than the Jixir Academy in China of the late 4th century BC.
Through yoga meditation, Maitreyanartha realized that everything can only be seen within our consciousness, and that the outer world remains empty. He founded the Yogacara school, also known as Vijnanavarta school. Asanga and Vasubandhu of the school debated with the Madhyamaka school at the Nalanda Academy whether the empty world is really changing. Thus, more varied Buddhist texts were made and transmitted even to China.
Either way, both thought the world was empty.
However, in the 5th century, the Hephthalites, a nomadic people of Central Asia, expanded their power and threatened the Sassanid Empire in Persia and the Gupta Empire in India. Persia had long been closely connected with South India through maritime trade. Persian prince Bodhidharma also crossed to Kalabhura, South India.
He would have some diplomatic mission.
Kalabhura was an armed state of the Indian mountain native Dravidian, opposing the Aryan Gupta Empire in the north. It kept Old Jainism and Theravada Buddhism against the northern Hinduism. In addition, it developed the combative martial art, Kalaripa Yattu. When the Sassanid Empire became a puppet of the Hephthalites, they were forced to launch a proxy war against the Eastern Roman Empire in 502. Bodhidharma never returned to Persia, but instead traveled to China.
After that, the center of Buddhism shifted to China, didn't it?